Do you want to take that you can use to both slander me out of context
Oh
and
boy.
use to promote your show, just like a bang for episode 1?
Sure.
And this you may even agree with this, but I feel like it's appropriately hot. I'm for sure looking at drafting Chig before I'm ever considering Kyle Pitts.
Welcome into The Flex, a fantasy football show. I am your host, JT Ruhnke, producer and writer here at Broadway Sports Media, and I should say welcome back. This show has taken a little bit of a hiatus over the past couple of years, but we are bringing back weekly fantasy football content for the 2023 season and beyond. Every Saturday, there will be a new episode right here on this feed for you to enjoy as I talk to special guests, get you primed for your fantasy drafts, and answer any and all of your fantasy questions during the season to best prepare you for your matchups. I've been playing fantasy football now for 13 years or so. I live and breathe fantasy football, and I'm so excited to talk some fake ball to all of you fake GMs out there. A quick shout out to the guys that came before me, like Zach Lyons, Justin Graver, and all the boys who did the show and gave me their grace to continue the show now. I noticed that there was kind of a hole in the market in Nashville for fantasy football content. So I'm so excited to bring it, especially to you guys here on the Broadway Sports Media Podcast Network. I want the show to be as much as it was um, beforehand, talking fantasy ball as well as being as viewer focused as possible. I know how frustrating week to week matchups can be and those decisions and how you want a second opinion on it. That's why the show will be catered to you. Just DM the Flex Twitter or Instagram page at Flex on Broadway on Twitter or at the Flex Pod on Instagram, and we will dive into your questions, opinions, and weekly banter every single week. This first episode, however, we're going to start off nice and simple, talking about the hometown two-tone blue. The Tennessee Titans have a lot of interesting fantasy potential, and I'm assuming many of you, like myself, are interested in drafting some of them. So we're going to talk about the floor and ceilings of these Tennessee Titans offensive players and where you should realistically draft them. And joining me today is Easton of the Hot Read podcast here on the Broadway Sports Media Network. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Alrighty, joining me on the first episode back on the Flex here is Easton, the host of the Hot Read podcast, which I'm also very familiar with. And Easton, this is quite interesting. It's like opposite day today.
Oh, how the turntables, JT. Oh, how the turntables. Look at you in the host chair.
I
I'm
know,
just
right?
here to be entertaining and be an adorable face.
Wow, maybe this is the role you've always been meant to play.
We'll
As you
find
are
out,
entertaining and
perhaps.
can talk anyone's ears off. But how are you doing
No
today?
doubt about that.
How are
I'm
you?
good, man. I'm good. I'm excited. It's finally the time of year where I'm starting to pay attention to all the fantasy football content online. You get fantasy, like some folks that work full time in fantasy, and I do not begrudge them this, have to pump it out like in March. And I'm like, I simply could not care any less, dude. But now I do care. And I find it all fascinating. And of course, going to be doing a ton of research the next month or so that I can feel like I won my draft and then inevitably be a very mid fantasy football manager. But we'll get to that eventually.
Yes, we will get to that. And today we're going to be talking about Titans players specifically in fantasy drafts. There
Mhm.
are the Titans offense is always a very interesting one when it
Yeah,
comes
I
to
heard they have
fantasy
no
drafts.
players. What happened?
I
This is gonna be a short show,
from
right?
from the national perspective, we're going to talk for 5 minutes on Derrick Henry, and then the show's going to be over.
Right,
Um,
right.
but they do have some pretty interesting prospects that I think if you're ballsy enough, if you're willing enough to maybe spend a little bit of chunk of change on them this year, it might reap some rewards. But before we get into that, let's start with the obvious player who is going to be talked about every single year the same exact way in Derrick Henry. Let's talk
The
about
only
him real
player on this
quick.
team that will have a 100% roster rate in every league. Like
Yes, exactly.
outside of him, he may be. The rest of these guys are probably going to be available at some point. Henry will be available on draft day. That's the only time.
Yes. So let's look at the rankings so far on where Fantasy Pros and The Ringer have him ranked. So Derrick Henry on Fantasy Pros comes in as the running back 9 on their board, right behind Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, and ahead of Ramondre Stevenson and Brees Hall. Over on The Ringer, let's see, Derrick Henry is ranked their RB8 between Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard, and then Nick Chubb and Ramondre Stevenson behind him. So basically, and we're looking at half PPR rankings for both of these. Basically, he's kind of ranked in the same spot, and the consensus on him is that he's not. I feel like there's been more so a shift in thinking more than just ranking him lower because of his talent. I think he's ranked a little bit lower because of how impactful the target share in the passing game is for a lot of these running backs. I mean, I think we're seeing it a lot this year
Right.
in a lot of mock drafts that I'm using and doing. The wide receiver position is just going much higher than it ever has been. Like picks 1 through 3 could easily be Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase, and we don't see a Christian McCaffrey and Austin Eckler go off the board until 4 or 5. So it's quite interesting, and I think there is definitely a shift with these top guys in Christian McCaffrey, Austin Eckler, Bijan Robinson, and Saquon Barkley. They are the bona fide top 4 because they have or will have a huge presence in the receiving game. Where I don't agree with a lot of these rankings here is that it's kind of bewildering to me that Jonathan Taylor is almost like 3 spots higher on every consensus ranking than Derrick Henry, which is very interesting to me considering how much Anthony Richardson will probably be used in the run game. Do you agree with these rankings, Easton? Where do you have Derrick Henry this year?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I agree that the reason why I think there's 3 prevailing reasons why you're seeing Derrick Henry lower than typical. And when we say lower than typical, he on I think
Still
any
a top
list
10
you'll
running
find
back.
right, and he's a fringe in fantasy context. He's a fringe first round pick still. He's been a first round pick the past 4 or 5 years. He's still hanging on to that territory. I think the 3 reasons why you're seeing him fall are first of all just age. I think it has a lot less to do with what people have seen from Henry on the field. His actual production is still there. The efficiency has fallen a little bit, year by year, no cliff by any means, but a precipitous drop off a little by little. You could argue that a part of that at least is due in part to the circumstances, like the offensive line he's running behind, the reliance on him from the Titans offense to do everything. Like when you don't have a threat elsewhere and a defense can truly key in on one guy, the efficiency is going to go down. But the Titans have historically not cared, right? They have gotten him production fantasy wise through sheer force. They have shoved him through, and the volume alone carries him, even if the efficiency isn't there. I think it's less to do with him in particular and more to do just with the running back position and our perception on running backs. Once you get to 28 years old, like Derrick Henry is at now, he's entering his 7th or 8th season now. You get more and more wary of that. It's the Travis Kelce thing, right? It's like, this is the year, guys. This is the year. I've been saying it 4 years in a row now, and he's been like doubling the next closest tight ends numbers in fantasy every year for the past 4 years. And it's the reason why I'm not in the championship every year, but this is the year that he falls off. The cliff is here. The same kind of thing happens for Henry. And I think a lot of people still consider him a safe high-end pick in fantasy because of the fact that he has so far, like Kelce, proven himself to be the exception to the rule. A lot of people I hear talk about fantasy, and they just talk about Henry and Kelce as, I know it doesn't make any sense, and on paper, it doesn't really track, and I wouldn't apply this rule to any other guy in the league, but for them, I'm just going to trust them until they prove otherwise. One of the other reasons why I think he's falling is because, and maybe I've just not been paying enough attention until now, JT, but I feel like this year, the 0 running back cult has got a lot of traction. And maybe this is just the changing dynamics of the NFL and the way that the league is continually a passing league. I do think that the 0 running back strategy is becoming really popular. And it's funny because it really doesn't change a whole lot. If everybody values receivers more than running backs, what does that mean, JT? So 4 years ago, you and I are sitting in a fantasy draft, and everybody has to get their high value running back first, and then the high value wide receiver second. Now, massive change. We're all getting the high value wide receivers first and the high value running back second. It's the same difference. So ultimately, it's not that big a deal. And the third reason, like you mentioned, is the pass catching element. Just looking at the Ringers rankings of running backs right here, just going down from the top, Christian McCaffrey, massive in the passing game. Austin Eckler, pretty much just utilized in the passing game in terms of his elite value. Bijan Robinson, we expect to be a do-it-all back. Saquon certainly used less than those guys, but is an element in the passing game and is younger. Jonathan Taylor, I'm with you, kind of strange. I want to circle back on that. Josh Jacobs, kind of in that same boat, younger. There may be an element of who else on the Raiders is going to do anything besides Devontae Adams, Tony Pollard, of course, and then Derrick Henry. So like 5 or 6 of the guys in front of him are all heavy passing game guys. With Henry, I would have argued this year that over the past 2 seasons, we have seen them utilize him in the passing game more and more, linearly increasing his usage rate in the passing game. But there's a rookie on this team named Tyjae Spears, who you and I both expect to get a lot of that play. And so I totally am with people when they say, I just don't know if he's going to be anything more than a 2-down back this year. He may be the best 2-down back in the league, but it's still just 2 downs. And so if I was to gripe, to circle all the way around to the actual question, do I agree with the rankings? If I were to have a disagreement with these rankings, I would question only a couple of things. It's the top 4 in front of him: McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan, and Saquon. I'm with you. I would rank those guys ahead of him as well. It's the next 3 guys: Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, that I have a question mark about in terms of them being a better value than Derrick Henry. And it's different for each one. With Taylor, it's like you were mentioning, it's a very similar skill set to Henry. You could argue he has a little bit more potential in the passing game, but
and
not.
Younger.
Yeah, he's 4. That's the biggest thing. He's 4 years younger. Now, you could also argue on the other side of the coin, he is coming off of an injury and a pretty disastrous season. We don't quite know what the team around him is going to look like this year. And he's got a quarterback now in Anthony Richardson who could absolutely gobble up some of those goal line touches and steal some of that tasty touchdown points from him. With Josh Jacobs, it's like, was that a fluke? We saw one awesome year.
I'm actually still super high on Josh.
You're still
Jacobs.
high. Okay.
Like, I think with that grouping, I would rank it after the top bona fide 4. I think it's Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, and I'd put Tony Pollard in there because I think he's not coming. We'll get to him
too.
But
he
it's
broke
not
his
like
leg.
yeah, but I mean everything looks good so far in camp. Like I'm pretty. And of course, we're in July and we have 2 weeks until we get to training camp and we see all of this. Right. But there's something to be said that if he's good to go, like I think he may have a case to be a top 3 running back.
If Dallas doesn't add any more running back competition, like there's still, I have heard, and maybe this is me being halfway out of touch with the Dallas community, as I willfully choose to be because I don't want anything to do with that team. I've still heard rumblings of like maybe they bring back Zeke. Like if he can't find a landing spot, he can be their short yardage goal line guy like he's been at a much smaller price point. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but like if they bring in somebody like that, or Dalvin Cook, again, I have no idea if they're even looking in the running back market or not. I don't know. But if they do, that obviously hurts his value. If he's truly the bona fide one, the bell cow going into this season, I'm with you that it's exciting if we can guarantee that injury is not going to hamper him. And I've heard medical experts talk about how, like, for a running back, a broken leg is 10 times better than like a torn ACL.
And that was my point when you said it was like it's so much better to just because that just heals better. It better. It's just with all the medical, like you're not going to have like super long lasting effects because the body just takes care of that a lot easier than something like a tendon or the muscle.
Right. You're not putting torque on your leg like you are with your knee. You're just putting pressure on it. And if the bone is healed, then it's, stronger than steel by volume, by weight. The only other thing I would say about Pollard and Jacobs is the reason why I can kind of understand them being higher than Henry is just because both of them are on a team where there's really only one other guy that you're worried about being a skill position player on that team and stealing a lot of the looks. With Pollard less so. I mean, CeeDee Lamb is obviously the other guy. They've got some other mid-tier weapons on that team. With Josh Jacobs, it really is him and Devontae so
they did sign Jacoby Myers, but
you're right. I'm sorry, I forgot about.
But the bottom line is that I rank Derrick Henry, Tony Pollard, and Josh Jacobs together because my main point with him to put a bow on it is that Derrick Henry has a pretty high floor because all three of those guys are volume guys. They are going to get
Yep.
the looks through and through. Josh Jacobs, we saw last year, regardless of how the offensive line looked, he's going to get the volume. Tony Pollard, if Zeke would have gotten out of his way, he's going to get the volume. Derrick
Mm-hmm.
Henry, even though Tyjae Spears is there, and we'll get to him, he's going to get the volume in this offense. I don't put um, what's his name, Jonathan Taylor in
Taylor,
that
right?
in that in that same category because I just question the volume that he's going to get
Mm.
with Anthony Richardson there. But like you said, it seems that we've kind of gone full circle, and instead of taking our high value running backs first, we are taking the high value receivers first and coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So he's still going to be there. If I'm in the second round and I have it's interesting. I think if I have picks maybe 1 through 6 in a 12-team league and I'm coming back for my second round, I would probably give Derrick Henry a consideration, but I
Right.
would
That's what I
not
was
be
going to ask if you wanted to
surprised.
put like defining gates on this. Where is the highest you would take him?
I
Is
think
it that
middle
like
of the
sixth
second
or
round.
middle
I
second?
think,
Okay.
yeah, middle second round, I think. Because I think I wouldn't be surprised if there are some leagues where you just get really good value on Derrick Henry and people are kind of out on him and you can even get him in the early third, you know? So I think if you're like one of teams 1 through 6 in the draft there, coming back around on the snake in round 2 and in round 3 early, I think that's where you're trying to target him. If you can get him in the third round and just wait, I think that's insane value. But
If
if
Derrick Henry is available in the third round of your draft,
yeah,
you run
yeah,
that card up. You
yeah,
run. You do
exactly.
not walk.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I think right there at the end of the second round is probably where he goes.
Can I ask you one hypothetical? Say you
Sure.
play in a league where it's just full of dinosaurs, that just the whole zero running back thing, they're out. It's a bunch of dudes that are just old school fantasy players and they're going for the high value running backs. At what point do you consider pulling the trigger on Henry much earlier if a bunch of these guys are off the board? Like if you see McCaffrey and Eckler and Bijan, and like if you're sitting at eighth or ninth in the first round, and the top 6 or 7 running backs are off the board, do you consider I guess what I'm asking is where's the cliff behind Henry and Pollard and Chubb? Is that tier break for you between Chubb and like Ramondre Stevenson and Travis Etienne? Is that where you're like, I want to get one of these top 9 guys that includes Pollard, Henry, and Chubb?
I think so. I think because there's going to be so much value in the later rounds on running backs who were
Right.
RB1s last year that can easily become just an RB2 that you just stick 2 RB2s in there. And if you have like 3 of the top 15 wide receivers, you're set, you know, or you go
Right.
out and get a Travis Kelce, a top wide receiver, and a top quarterback in this draft. And if you have these two, so I'm not crazy on trying to go get one of these stud guys because I think there's just a lot more value to be had in the later rounds.
Right.
To that being said, like if there are in fact dinosaurs who just don't buy into the new world order of
Just let
zero
them be
RB,
dinosaurs then. Let them do it.
I think I honestly would, because if I can get a Cooper Kupp or I guess maybe like a Jamar Chase and then come back and get a Tyreek Hill on that
Right.
because everyone is so neglecting and wants that old style running back to anchor your
Yes.
team
If you can
around,
double down on those
I'm gonna let
wide
everybody do it.
receivers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think my ultimate point there that I was trying to set up for you and you slam dunked it. I really don't think you have to feel pressured to have, like, it's not like you have to have one of McCaffrey, Eckler, Bijan, Saquon, JT, Jacobs, Pollard, Henry, Chubb. They're the best. I think that's kind of our upper crust. And then you get to the Ramondre Stevensons and the Travis Etiennes and the Brees Halls. I really don't think you have to have one of those guys. So I'm with you on that.
Let's move on to the other running back who the Titans selected in the third round of the NFL draft this year, Tyjae Spears, who both of us are pretty interested in this year. Tyjae Spears is coming in at the 69th ranked running back on Fantasy
Nice.
Pros.
Yeah.
Nice. And then the 60th running back on the Ringers Fantasy Football rankings. For context, the people around him on Fantasy Football or Fantasy Pros, you have guys like Zach Evans, who is also a rookie, Isaiah
Right.
Spiller, backup to Austin Eckler. You have Chase Brown, who is a rookie in Cincinnati, and then you have Boston Scott around him in the Ringers
giant killer.
rankings. You have guys
The
like
Ringers
Roshan.
rankings, there are only 2 guys below him. He is the
Yes,
third
he is
third
the
lowest
third
ranked guy on the
last
list.
ranked, and that's, I feel, kind of surprising because if you look at the guys around him, he's ranked below guys like Zamir White, James Robinson, Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Like, am I crazy to think that Tyjae Spears could look? And I've said this before on a show we did with Danny Kelly.
Mhm.
Am I crazy to think that Tyjae Spears might not play a role we've seen like Tariq Cohen play in Chicago?
Mm, No, you're
Like,
not crazy at
I
all.
think that's my comp for him. And if I'm looking for just like dumpster diving in the last 2 or 3 rounds of my fantasy football draft, or even if I'm looking on the waiver wire right after the draft, like,
Right.
Tyjae Spears is a name that I think I would want to stash on my bench.
Yeah, let's make that part clear out of the gate. This is a guy who we aren't talking about taking before the 14th, 15th, 16th,
No.
17th round of your draft. He's a flyer guy for sure. And if he's there after the draft as an undrafted guy, he's absolutely somebody that I would look at just stashing. There are two big reasons that I think aren't really all that hard to wrap your mind around and are the reason why I would consider him much higher on the list than a lot of these guys. The first of which is the handcuff. If
True.
Derrick Henry goes
Yes.
down, God forbid, we have a whole half season of experience with the Tennessee Titans, having lost Derrick Henry in 2021, going to a two-headed backfield at the time, and continuing to. I mean, they went to New England in like week 13 of that season and ran the ball more than I think the team had run the ball in like 90 games. They would not and did not quit the ground attack. The identity of this team is built around Derrick Henry for sure, but that's because the identity is really built around the running game. Derrick Henry just happens to be a great figurehead for that philosophy. So if he goes down, who he's getting all of the touches, right? Like all of them. Like behind him, Hassan Haskins is not long for this team, we believe. And
Yes.
then you've got dudes, Jonathan Ward, who's a UDFA, I believe he's a UDFA rookie, and Julius Chestnut, who last year was a UDFA rookie, who would
I
play
think they were
more.
both UDFA rookies last year who
Oh,
showed some
okay, so
flashes in games where
you're right,
Derrick Henry was out last year against the Dallas Cowboys, but still, like,
right.
if there's an option after Derrick Henry, like, I'm taking Tyjae Spears through and through. Like, I'm
And
not even
not
thinking
as a
about
split
anyone.
backfield either.
No.
I think he takes over as that. I'm getting at least 75% of the workload. So that's number one. There are very few guys like that in the league where it's like this is a team that is run heavy. That if they lose their primary runner, it will not matter. They will still be run heavy. And this is the number. Like it's not going to be a by committee situation. This is the clear bona fide guy behind him. That's what a lot of people expect the Titans are planning on doing, grooming Spears to become the next Henry, right? And be that bell cow workload guy. The other reason is upside. For me, and this is just a philosophy thing, when you are drafting, when you're taking flyers at the end of your draft, the last 3 or 4 rounds of the draft, or you're looking for flyers in the waiver wire on draft night after the dust is settled, I'm not looking for guys that are like safe, higher floor. Guys like James Robinson, for example, or a CEH, or a Gus Edwards, or a Jalen Warren. I'm looking for guys that have that upside potential. And we've talked about this on my show a couple of times, just how much this Titans team utilized the player whose name I regularly
Dontrell
forget.
Hilliard.
Thank you. Every time I think Dontrell Hilliard, I get every other running back on the team stuck in my. I'm like Hassan Haskins. No, not Hassan. Dontrell Hilliard. Dontrell Hilliard last season through 4 or 5 games led the team in touchdowns by like 3 or 4 touchdowns. He was their red zone touchdown receiving game merchant.
And they
That's
always were on like wheel route, like receptions
yes.
out the back door. That was like
Yep.
a sneaky play, which I feel like we've seen Tyjae Spears already in OTAs be this elusive guy who can just
Yes.
make a cut on a
Yes.
dime. Like he's going to play that Dontrell Hilliard role, I think, very well, which is why I agree exactly with you, is that when you're looking for upside in these guys in the later rounds, you're not wanting to look for upside for, I feel like, down the road upside. I think the best way to play upside in the later rounds is to kind of project, okay, what are some names that you're kind of already scouting what the waiver wire looks for week 1 and 2. What are these guys that I think could explode in week 1 or 2 that would be hot commodities on the waiver wire? I can already have on my team. And I think
Yep.
Tyjae Spears is one of them, because we saw early and often last year in the Giants game, in the Raiders game, in a lot of these early games, we saw Dontrell Hilliard being utilized a lot before he went down with injury. So I totally agree with you that if you're looking for a running back just to stash away on your bench for a rainy day, Tyjae Spears is the guy. And if you're
My
looking
last note,
for,
by
oh
the
yeah,
way, is that I think a lot of people will be like, well, the Titans as an organization historically slow play their rookies, and it's true. They do. They typically
yes,
really ease them in to the point of frustration of a lot of fans. And when that point is brought up in the context of Tyjae Spears, my rebuttal is simply, yeah, I think they're going to slow play his development. But when I think about what will assignment number 1 be for him, what will his first, hey, master this and we'll move on, it's going to be that red zone wheel route touchdown merchant. Like that's because
yes,
that's the only immediate need they have in their running game, in the running back room. Okay, we no longer have the guy that did it in the past. We need a Dontrell Hilliard type. We can have him play that role out of the gate.
yeah, I agree. And if you're going after Derrick Henry in your first or second or third round, like Tyjae Spears is almost a must, because
It's an ultimate handcuff.
become
Yep.
he's handcuffs have become so important, I think, for the fantasy football landscape.
The Alexander Madison
Yes,
inaugural honorary handcuff. Yeah.
there you go. So yeah, stash Tyjae Spears. We like him. Let's move on to our favorite player over on the Hot Read podcast, who we could probably spend a million years talking about. But
Kyle Phillips.
Yes, Kyle. Mason Kinsey.
Mason Kinsey. All right, we're
draft
ninth
Mason
round
Kinsey.
for Mason
Yeah, I
Kinsey.
think-
8th.
Let's talk about Chig, the
Chig.
soon-to-be star tight end of the Tennessee Titans. And
No
I remember
longer underrated, by the way. They were
Yes.
talking about this on Football and Other F Words. We're friends of the Football and Other F Words show. We enjoy that show and what Mike and Zach do over there. They were talking yesterday or earlier this week about how, like, can we quit talking about Chig like he's underrated? And I think that it is officially, like, we were talking about him in the spring that way because he was not being talked about. Like, who do the Titans have to pass to? Chig, guys, you can pass to him. Now,
Yep.
I think nationally he's gotten the appropriate hype, and I think we're now teetering on. Let's not overdo it here. The potential
Yes.
is there, but we don't need to. He's not Travis Kelce, all right? So let's
And
chill
maybe
a little
maybe
bit.
that's a fault of our own show over on the Hot Read podcast.
No, I refuse. No. I refuse to say that we've overdone it. I think that we have done it appropriately, but now we're just gonna. I think this is the time to.
Is this the
everybody,
time to
everybody
cool
knows
the
what he
jets?
is. We're excited
Yes.
about it. Let's not overinflate it.
Now, this would be quite an interesting conversation here that I'm going to let you lead, because
Okay.
drafting Chig, I feel like is an interesting topic. And
3rd round.
I've well, you'd be surprised, ladies and gentlemen. Talking to
I'll never
Easton
cheat.
here, I have now been in 2 drafts with you,
Oh,
and
no.
you are quite the madman when you draft. You take now it's commendable to a fault. You take big swings, and you know what? For 2 years now, they haven't worked, but you do, and I have to commend you on taking big
Remind
swings.
me, what was my swing 2 years ago? I know what my swing was last year.
The swing 2 years ago is that in the first 3 rounds, you took two tight ends. You took Travis Kelce and
Oh,
George
true.
Kittle in your first 3
did.
rounds and said, I'm going to have a monopoly on tight ends. And then George Kittle played 2 games, and you had Travis Kelce.
It was
and had to
cool
sell
on
him at the
paper until
deadline.
George
It
Kittle was made of tissue paper, dude. And I will say this, for that one, that was not a if I'm on trial for murder, that one I'm getting second degree, because that was not preconceived. I did not go into the
Yes.
draft planning that. It just so happened that I drafted Kelce and then Kittle was in my lap, and I was like, haha, let me take the only tight ends on the board. Last year was probably
Yes.
worse, because about a month out, I was dead set on
You were,
getting
and
a
you
certain
did
player.
you let everyone know last year that you were dead set on taking
Back
Damian
off.
Pierce, and you did what in the 4th round, 5th round,
4th, I
somewhere
think, yeah.
around there.
Yeah, it was
so
4th, I
Damian
think.
Pierce hadn't played a down of football yet. I took him in the 4th round.
He
Your
played
second-
preseason snaps. He looked fantastic.
Yes, he did. And you know what? To give him credit, from like week 6 through like week 12, that pick looked like
Carried my
it
team.
paid off for you. Unfortunately, it was a little bit too
Then
little
his coach
too late.
killed him. Yeah,
for
it
you.
was his
Yes,
coach's fault.
very
I blame
true.
the coach.
And we'll let's not get on a Damian Pierce, but it sounds like he is his coach is going to kill him again after signing Devin Singletary.
Yeah,
And just
I'm
it's
afraid
it's
of
very
that. I'm not as high this year, is all I'll say on that.
Chigakonkwo. Easton, where are you going to target Chigakonkwo this year in fantasy drafts?
Well, can we first contextualize where he is on these big
Yes,
boards, right? So,
let's do that.
yeah.
That's probably a good idea. Chigakonkwo on the fantasy or the Ringer fantasy rankings is tight end 13, planted firmly between Cole Kmet and Dalton Schultz. And then there's other guys like Gerald Everett, Zach Ertz, and Greg Dulcich around him. And on the Fantasy Pros rankings, he is tight end 12 with Dalton Schultz, Greg Dulcich, and Cole Kmet around him. So similar company. And to be honest, like I I don't have a problem with that. I think there's a lot of
It's
upside
fine.
with a lot of those guys. And I
Sure.
think that they're ranking him right where he needs to be because you have two options, I guess, now when it comes to fantasy football in drafting. You can either take a tight end within the first 4 rounds and have that be one of your picks, or you can basically wait
Or
until like
never take one. Right.
or the 8th or 9th round and grab two of them and pray for upside. And I think that's where you're going to see Chigakonkwo go, and a lot of 8th, 9th round upside pick for a guy who, if you're privy to the knowledge that Chigakonkwo is going to be a massive part of this offense, like it's not crazy to think that if Tim Kelly decides to actually finally throw the ball to Chigakonkwo, he's going to get the same reception share that he did last year, which was he had 7 to 8 targets a game. He's going to catch 5 to 6 of them, have 40 yards, and hopefully get a touchdown. And if you play PPR, that's you're looking at 10 to 15 points a game. And I think if you're drafting Chigakonkwo in the 8th or 9th round, knowing that you're not taking a top like 5 guy at the tight end position, that's perfectly fine.
Do you want to take that you can use to both slander me out of context and use to promote your show, just like a bang for episode 1?
Sure.
And this you may even agree with this, but I feel like it's appropriately hot. I'm for sure looking at drafting Chigakonkwo before I'm ever considering Kyle Pitts.
Ooh, wow. So
and that has much less to do with their talent level or play style and much more to do with two things. One, my trust in the way that their coach will utilize them in the offense. As much as love Art Smith, obviously big fan of Art Smith and what he does, and I think he's an offensive wizard, but a lot like Kyle Shanahan, he's one of those guys where every single week it feels like a different guy goes off, and he's so good at spreading the love that the stars don't really get the attention that they deserve. And last year and the year before, to an extent, Kyle Pitts owners have been furious with Arthur Smith. Our guy Danny Kelly over at the Ringer has historically had a running feud with Art Smith because he was one of the Kyle Pitts truthers, and he felt like Art Smith was screwing him over, and to a degree he was. The other thing is just the mouths to feed. That's the biggest thing for me with tight ends. Where do you come in on your roster in the pecking order of receiving threats? Where are you in line to be fed in the passing game? With Kyle Pitts, there are a number of guys that aren't necessarily in front of him, but are kind of right there. Like he's having to contend with Bijan Robinson, who's going to be gobbling up snaps in the running game and then also be utilized in the passing game. Cordarrelle Patterson still exists. The rookie last year who was really promising, the running back whose name I can't think of, help me out if you know.
Tyler Algier.
Yeah, Algier, thank you.
And you have Cordarrelle Patterson
still there.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. And then in the receiving game, you've also got Drake London to contend with. So there are a number of mouths to feed. Where Kyle Pitts comes in on the pecking order of mouths to feed on that offense, yeah, he might be like pass catcher 2 or 3, but that upper crust is kind of all smushed together. We've talked about this. We've beaten this horse to a pulp. Chigakonkwo is very much one of the only viable top-end pass catchers on this team. Like, we think there's a decent chance it goes Treylon Burks, Chigakonkwo, and then maybe a pretty significant cliff to Kyle Phillips, Derrick Henry, Tyjae Spears, NWI, Chris Moore. Like, those guys.
Underrated king.
That's what I'm saying. Like, Chris Moore and Kyle Phillips are the two that I have earmarked as maybe the number 3 and 4 biggest volume guys in the passing game. I kind of think there's a bit of a cliff after Treylon. Like besides Treylon and Chig, is there anybody on this team that you are pretty confident going into each game this year that they're going to get theirs?
Not really. I mean,
That's what I'm saying.
I think there's a take to be made for Kyle Phillips if he stays healthy and he
Yeah, I
just like
agree.
eats from the slot. But no, not right now. No, confidently I can say that we don't have enough evidence to refute that Chigakonko is not going to be basically the wide receiver 2 on this team.
And that's what I'll say to folks who are like, you're overhyping him, you're overdoing it. He's still young, he's still developing, he's probably not at his peak. I agree with all of that. When we talk about his talent, we're talking about the upside, the potential, how he is ascending and getting better each and every day. And that's what we love. It's not the fact that we think that he already is talent-wise a top 3 tight end in the league. I don't think that. I think that I could probably name at least 7 or 8 other guys in the league, if not more, off the top of my head, that I think are more talented, more complete tight ends today. The reason why I'm so high on him is a combination of I think that the sky is the limit for him as he continues to develop. And he happens to be on a team where he's going to get crazy, crazy numbers of looks. Those two things in union are amazing. Like if you, for example, let's take another guy on this list, Greg Dulcich, swap him and Chigakonkwo, like what team they're playing for, right? Greg Dulcich is now the guy on the Titans who's the high upside sophomore season guy who looks really promising and is going to be a threat in the passing game. I'd be saying the same things, even though I think Chigakonkwo has a higher ceiling and is today a markedly better tight end than Greg Dulcich is. It simply is the combination of scenarios. And so, like, for example, for Greg Dulcich to be ahead of Chigakonkwo, I think that's kind of silly considering the mouths to feed on the Broncos. Everybody knows their wide receiver core and how there's a number of guys that are considered viable, good options in addition to some guys this offseason that I think people are forgetting about, like Marquez Callaway. You know, they went and grabbed the old New Orleans. Sean Payton went and grabbed a handful of old New Orleans boys.
He
like
did.
His boys he kind of brought in. Marquez Callaway is one of those guys. They drafted
They're gonna
Marvin Mims.
They're gonna have Samaj P. Ryan out of the backfield who's gonna catch a bunch of balls.
But even just in the tight end position, Dulcich is considered the one according to Ourlad's depth chart. But then behind him, you've got Chris Manhertz, formerly from Jacksonville, Adam Troutman from New Orleans, one of his New Orleans boys, Albert O, who we're certainly in the post-type era.
I totally forgot about him. Yes,
I'm saying we're in the post-type era for sure.
He definitely was a guy who was promising, but he went down to injury, and I think that's why he couldn't stay on the field. But I mean, if he gets on the field, he's a rookie athletic
and Tommy
freak.
Hudson. There's a lot of guys in that room. I just think, and I've said it 19 times, but the talent combined with the opportunity, it couldn't get any better for Chigakonkwo. I think that the sky is the limit in terms of fantasy production because of those two things.
Yeah, so that's a guy definitely in our drafts. I'm going to be watching you because you're going to be watching Chigakonkwo's stock.
Let's circle around to where you would take him. Where would you? Before I answer, where would you take Chigakonkwo?
So,
and this has a lot to do with where you would even where are you considering a tight end? Because like you said, if you don't take one of the top guys early, then you kind of wait.
Yeah, and I think I like both options this year. I think there's really good value in the back half of the draft, but I also am not going to refute taking a Mark Andrews or Travis Kelce in round 1. Like I am not opposed to taking.
Andrews,
really, I think he's fine. I think he's going to be better than he was last year, mostly because he didn't have.
Well, I think he'll be good, but in terms of like a first or second round guy, I would not take him personally.
Yeah, I would not take. The only guy you're taking in the first. Let's just get this out here. My take is the only tight end that should be reasonably taken in the first 2 rounds is Travis Kelce, and there is even a take to be made that he should be taken top 5. Round 3 or 4 is when you start getting in that Mark Andrews and George Kittle realm, and then I think
Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert,
TJ Hawkinson as well. Those guys, I think you can start to make a case for. So it's either if you want to use one of your 3rd or 4th round picks on a tight end, or if you want to wait until like the 9th or 10th round. Because I think there's a lot of good value. Like you said, Greg Dulcich, Chigakonkwo, and Dalton Schultz, I feel like are all in the same boat of they are going.
Have you heard the way people were talking about Dalton Schultz this year? Like he just sucks. It's been so confusing to me.
So wild.
He was such a stud in Dallas, and fantasy wise, he was one of the only tight ends that week in and week out you could trust. Yeah, he's going to produce, and now he's just dead to the world because he's in Houston.
Yeah,
I don't get it, man.
I don't get it either. Personally, I think
who is a rookie quarterback's best friend, JT?
A tight end. And you know what?
A veteran, capable
That's
tight end.
why I think I would still probably take Dalton Schultz over Chig because I know he's
No
just going to
problem
be
with
the
that.
number one
Yep.
target in Houston. And I think for fantasy purposes, I think Dalton Schultz just has a little bit more experience and is a little better right now.
Yeah.
But like either way, I'm taking both of those guys maybe in the 9th round.
Yeah, and that
I think that's where I'm
disparity,
gonna
like just
take him.
to illustrate to the people that are listening, that disparity of, yeah, they may be one of the top tight ends, but there is such a cliff with the tight ends. Like using the Ringers rankings for example, Chigakonko is tight end 13, which makes you think, oh, he's that's top 15 guy, top half of the league in terms of overall positional value, like including all positions in the main big board ranking everybody. He is their 132nd ranked player, even though he is tight end 13, which equates to round like 13, right? If I'm not doing my math right. So um, I would take him. I'd probably be more horny about it than you are and just be excited. Like, because the problem with me as a drafter fundamentally in fantasy football, and this is why I struggle with my initial roster is what's one of the oldest adages in any draft, but in the NFL draft, you got to fall in like with the guys. You cannot fall in love with guys. I fall in love with guys, and that is my problem. And when you do that,
and that's why I'm trying to stay away and
over.
not get too horny for Chigakonko because I want to draft him, but at the same time, like
words to heart this year, we're gonna roll the dice and play the board. I'm gonna try my best to play the board, but I'll tell you this much:
works out.
If we get around to round 8, for example, and the top tight ends remaining on the board are Pat Freiermuth, Greg Dulcich, Dalton Schultz, Chigakonko, I'm starting to get antsy and thinking about pulling the trigger, but I'm with you. It's like round 8 or 9 is the earliest I'd consider it, and it depends on how the draft is shaken out so far. Shaken out so far, but that's where I'd be considering him.
The final guy that we have to talk about is Treylon Burks, who is both boring and super interesting for fantasy purposes, in my opinion. Let's talk about his ranking first. Treylon Burks on Fantasy Pros comes in as the 34th ranked wide receiver, right between Mike Evans, Deontay Johnson, Jahan Dotson, George Pickens, and a free agent DeAndre Hopkins. So interesting. I feel like he fits in well with that crowd of just like, what do we do with this guy? Like George Pickens and Deontay Johnson, I feel like, what do we do with them? Because like we don't know who's the top dog there. Like is George Pickens actually going to take a second year leap like so many people have been hyping him up to do? I don't know.
You say that Mike Evans? You kind of think no. I don't know.
I do kind of.
Well, hang on. I know what Mike Evans is. That's not the question. The question is who is throwing him the ball, and if it's Baker Mayfield, I'm running and screaming.
Yes, and then guys like Jahan Dotson, who showed promise, but Sam Howell. Like it's just like in this list of people, I think I'm still taking Treylon Burks ahead of all those guys because we at least know who the quarterback. Yeah,
he's the only one that doesn't have a big fat question mark right there, right? He's not got competition in terms of the alpha dog like Deontay Johnson and I was looking at it.
George Pickens.
Thank you, Pickens. And then those other guys who have massive question marks at the quarterback position. With Treylon Burks, he's the number one for sure. And now if they land DeAndre Hopkins somehow, this is all null and void. Okay, massive disclaimer. Don't listen to any of this if the Titans manage to get DeAndre Hopkins. That changes things. It doesn't totally change things. I still think Burks would be the number one, just the volume would change. Yeah. And he has a quarterback. We laugh about this all the time, JT. Casual folks, for some, we don't know why. For some folks, for some reason, folks that aren't in Titan circles and aren't big ball knowers, big NFL heads, seem to think that Ryan Tannehill has literally fallen off the face of the planet, and that Will Levis is in line to start this season.
Yes, I'll bring this up real quick. I have to laugh because
the
sports media is so funny because you have these TikTok guys whose name sports on media. TikTok is called Sports Media, and they're literally just slideshows on TikTok that are just like, my predictions for all 16 AFC teams this year. And at number 16, it's Titans 4-13. Will Levis doesn't take that first year leap, and they don't have anybody on defense. Therefore, 4-13. And I just have to send it to you.
I believe he said,
so funny.
I believe this one guy in particular who you sent to me today, he said, and Jeffrey Simmons and
Kevin Byard
are the only two good defenders. My brother in Christ, I'm once again, I'm asking you to learn ball. That is not even remotely true.
It's so funny. But like you said, Ryan Tannehill is throwing him the ball, which is
All
better
year,
than
by the
either
way.
other option.
Like, not a
Um,
question. It's
yeah,
Tannehill. Yeah.
it really is. Now, here's a question, because if we move over to the Ringers rankings, they have him ranked as the wide receiver 36.
Mhm.
But two other guys that are kind of around the same kind of ADP there at wide receiver 39 and 40 is JSN, Jackson Smith and Jigba, and Jordan Addison. So my question to you, let's say, and they're both ranked between the 80 and 95th pick. So you're looking same round, 8th to 9th round or so in your draft, as we just talked about with tight ends. Would you take Treylon Burks, who hasn't played a lot, admittedly? He did have some injury issues, but has come back and looked a lot better, and look a lot faster and stronger this offseason? Or would you take the upside on a guy like JSN or Jordan Addison to play that wide receiver 2-3 role in some pretty high prolific passing offenses?
So, not to not answer your question, but to kind of put my perspective on Burks into focus first,
Mm-hmm.
the way that I view Burks this season is a lot more similar than not to how I viewed CD Lamb last year. It's a guy who I am confident is a talented receiver. Now, I will say I had more confidence going into 2022 of what CD Lamb is or could be than I do with Burks. Like, we still, durability is the biggest thing, right? But then we also are not positive yet whether or not, we've gotten flashes of it. We think that he can be that number one wide receiver alpha dog and handle what that demanding role brings. Double teams, boxing in one with the elite corner following you around the field. We think that that's the case. We don't know it. I think we knew that more with CD Lamb, but it is similar in the sense that who else on this team is going to challenge him for that role? Nobody, for sure. Not happening, right? Same deal with Burks and Lamb last year. Also the case that while it may not be a team that is a true aired out passing team, like we know the Titans are a running team, we've gotten nothing but indications from them this year that despite their weapons at their disposal being less than in the eyes of many, they are gearing up this season to be a more balanced team as a running passing split. And the new Tim Kelly offense may be less of that Shanahan mold of offense and maybe more of that spread West Coast offense that we saw him run a good deal in Houston. And what I saw at OTAs in person kind of confirmed that they may not be, a team that I say may not, they will not be a team that you're like, oh, they're a passing team now. But I don't think they'll be so run heavy. I mean, we've seen these charts about like, oh, look at how Todd Downing ran on first down all but 3 times last year, every single time. Like that's not going to be the case with this team. They're going to be passing more. And I think that's only going to benefit Treylon Burks. And so, again, it is, I think people misunderstand folks that are talking about the Titans and know about the Titans like we are, talking about guys like Treylon Burks and Chig so highly. It's not that we are overrating their talent. And it's not that we are not considering the fact that they are still more potential than they are known commodities. But it is the fact that they have that crazy high potential that we tend to believe in, combined with the fact that the situation presents an opportunity that is so advantageous from a fantasy perspective in the simple sense of who else is going to be the guy getting the touches. It's going to be him.
Yep.
And so for that reason, I've already forgotten who were the two guys that you were asking me to
The two rookies, JSN and Jordan
Okay.
Addison.
Yeah, so I take him above both of those guys instantly, and the only reason is because I know that Burks, first of all, he's going to be a better receiver this season because I think that from a prospect standpoint, I would actually, if you were to go back before any of them were drafted and just have me rank the prospects, it goes Burks, JSN, Addison in that order. Really not all that hard for me. I think that if Burks was in this past year's draft, I mean, Burks was drafted 16th 2 seasons ago and was the 3rd or 4th wide receiver off the board. This past year, JSN, also the not the first receiver, second receiver off the board, I think, or was he the first this year?
I think he was the first. Yep.
Okay, so he was the first, but he was drafted what, like 20th, 21st. So
I think he was drafted 16th as well to the Seattle
was he 16th
Seahawks.
as well? Okay,
I
well,
believe so. Because I think they traded up for him.
okay, well, I will still argue my point in the sense that Treylon Burks was the third or fourth receiver off the board and went 16th. JSN was the best receiver in his draft and went 16th. I think Burks is a better prospect than JSN was. I think I like them both a lot, but with that extra year of NFL experience under his belt for Burks, that is a clear tiebreaker for me. And that is all. I went into all of that. I meant to make that way more simple. It's burying the lead. The lead is Burks is going to be the bona fide number one on this team. JSN's going to be the 3 pretty definitively. Like I will, barring injuries, I will be shocked if he is getting more looks than Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are. Same deal for Jordan Addison. He's not going to necessarily be the 3, but he's certainly not going to be the 1. We know who the 1 is in Minnesota. It is Justin Jefferson. And as far as ones go, you can call him like a 1.5 because he's going to demand that full 1 target share and then some. There are going to be multiple weeks this year where he's getting double-digit targets, double-digit receptions, and that's going to do nothing but take away from Addison's production. So again, even putting talent aside, just the opportunity, the role that they're going to play, it makes Burks the clear option, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think I'm leaning towards you on that because, like you said, that volume. I think right now I still would put.
Can you make the counter argument? What would your number one counter argument to that be? Because I think I know what it would be, and it's simply that people could say, "Well, I think the Titans' offense is going to score roughly 0 touchdowns, and these other offenses are going to score touchdowns." Which
I think the counterpoint would be that the offensive efficiency is not going to translate to fantasy purposes. I think that Treylon Burks might be a really good NFL wide receiver, but for fantasy purposes, he might not be all that, which is why I would still consider him to be maybe one of my 2 flex options going into each week and being able to draft him around the 8th to 9th round as well. I wouldn't be mad at that ADP because I think that's what he is right now. I think he is a flex guy that probably is going to get 8 to 9 targets a game, catch 6 of them or so, and hopefully go for maybe 80, 90 yards and get a score. And I think that's what you're going to get from him right now. I think his floor right now is anywhere between 8 to 11 points is what you're going to get from him. And now if they do get more efficient on offense with Tim Kelly this season, he could become a great wide receiver too. You got a steal of a wide receiver that was supposed to play a flex role.
And that's what I was going to say. When you're looking at a guy like that where it's potential and less known commodity, you have to parse what is he now versus what you think he might be by the end of the year. I think it's perfect. I think it's not over or underrating it. I think it's perfectly rated, appropriately rated. He is a very good flex option right now. And I know a lot of people go into fantasy drafts and just their entire fantasy philosophy, which is mine as well. Hey, how about we just don't draft or play the players that play on bad teams? Like maybe we just play the players on the good teams that are going to score more. I'm with you. I am. And so if you are one of the people that many people consider the Titans to be maybe not a horrible team this year, but certainly not on the good side of the spectrum, if you think that's going to be the case, I get that. I also think there's room to break that rule where it's like, okay, yeah, this team may not be good. They may actually be actively bad. But if there is 1 or 2 studs on this team and then
kind of like
nobody else,
kind of like a Deontay Johnson 2 years ago when Big Ben was on his way out. I feel like.
Yep.
I feel 100%. I feel like that's a really good comp for him. And yeah, I agree. If at the end of the day, volume is king for me personally. I think like no matter
you can get a
how
wide
good
receiver
the team
1
is,
on their team, like they're the wide receiver 1 for a team, and it's your flex option. That's perfect. That's exactly what you want.
I would agree. I would take him in the 8th or 9th as
same range as Chig.
Yes,
Okay.
I think I
gotcha.
would.
I think that's where I look as well.
Yeah.
Where is
he ranked
he's ranked
here?
Like what round?
He's the 81st.
81st.
81st
I like it.
player overall. So
okay, so right around that 8th round. Yep.
And I think like you said, there's a lot of interesting people around there. Deontay Johnson, George Pickens, Jahan Dotson, the rookies, but none of them are truly a bona fide wide receiver 1 like Treylon Burks is. And that's where you got to kind of shop for that value and get that volume, I think.
And last note, just to be clear, we are by exclusion definitively saying there is nobody else in this Titans team that you should be considering drafting. right? I don't.
Yeah, I would say so.
Well,
Yes.
I'll say
I
Kyle
was I
Phillips
was
falls
gonna
into that maybe a flyer option around 16, 17, 18. But
I don't even
that's
think so because there's just so much wide receiver depth out there. Like
well,
until
yeah, you're
Kyle
right.
Phillips proves it to me,
It
you
depends
know?
on what. So, like, if you're in a 12 or 14 team league and it's truly just barren wasteland and you're looking for upside, then I can understand spending a 17th round pick. I mean, this is when everybody's like looking at drafting a kicker or a defense, right? If that's where you are and you're just like, I'm not about that. I'm a waiver wire defense guy. I'm a waiver wire kicker guy. I'll just do flyers on those guys. Then I wouldn't hate a Kyle Phillips pick, but no, that's the highest possible scenario. No, I think that by the end of the year he could be rostered in 90% of leagues because he has reached his potential. But right now, there's just too much question mark.
I agree. I think don't go get Ryan Tannehill. There's other options. Go get yourself a good quarterback. We'll talk about this later
You
this
can take
month.
Tannehill off the waiver wire, but do not go draft him.
Yes, do not
Yeah.
go draft Ryan Tannehill. And now I think that is going to be it for this first episode back on the Flex here. Easton, thank you so much for joining me here. I think we learned a lot today. Take Tyjae Spears. Don't get too horny for Chig. Find guys with volume. I think it's always that's kind of the rules.
We're
life,
trying
right?
to get down to basics, the fundamentals here, and I think that
The
we've done
fundamentals. Always have a backup plan. Tyjae Spears. Don't get too horny. Chig Okonkwo. Find
Derrick
value.
Henry's still
Diamonds
safe.
in the rough.
Yep.
Yes. Derrick Henry is still going to be good.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. It was awesome being the
course.
first guest. Hopefully, I'll be back maybe sporadically throughout the season, and I can't wait for this show to do it. I'll be the biggest fan of this show. Hopefully, we can pump it up and get a big audience. So I'm excited.
True. Very excited. Yep. And like I said in the intro here, if you have questions, if you have opinions, if you have ideas, we're going to try to do as much mailbagging things that we can do. Send them over to the Flex Twitter account and Instagram account. Once again, that's at Flex on Broadway on Twitter and at the Flex Pod on Instagram. I'll be checking those every single week. If you guys have questions, if you have concerns about your drafts, let me know. I'm so excited and happy to talk about them. And like I said, that's going to be it for today. I am your host, JT Ruhnke. Thank you, Easton, once again, and we will see you next week.